The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the kind of silence that settles after a long day or the comforting hush that wraps around you when you get home late. No, this was manufactured. Intentional. Like someone had swept the house clean of evidence. Too still, too orderly, like it was trying to convince me everything was okay before I even asked. It was late afternoon. I just returned from a 3-day business trip, standard stuff, client meetings and hotel coffee and too many small talks. I was tired, but not the kind of tired you feel in your bones. This was mental, emotional. Like my mind had been sprinting all day for no reason I could name. The second thing I noticed was the scent. Someone had been here. Someone who wasn't me. The air held a sharp cologne, expensive, maybe European, one I didn't recognize. Woody with a hint of citrus. Masculine. It was faint, like it had been sprayed hours ago, but it hadn't faded completely. And it wasn't mine. My stomach tightened, but I told myself not to jump to conclusions. I forced myself to breathe, to slow down. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I'd become one of those guys who made up stories in his head to fill the spaces left by absence. Still, my eyes drifted around the apartment for any changes. The throw pillows on the couch were fluffed just a little too evenly. A candle on the kitchen counter had been blown out but was still warm. Someone had tidied. That's when I saw her phone. Kayla never left it unattended. Never. But there it was on the counter, screen up as if it had been left in a hurry. A message popped up from a name I recognized, Brooke. Just a photo. I glanced at it without thinking. The screen was already lit, showing a moment frozen in time. Kayla. In a cafe I didn't recognize. Her eyes crinkled at the corners in a way I hadn't seen in a while. She looked happy. Not fake happy, not social media happy, but genuinely relaxed. But what chilled me wasn't her expression, it was her hand. Resting gently, familiarly on the wrist of a man whose face was only half visible in the frame. His posture leaned into hers. Their body language wasn't just comfortable. It was an asterisk, mate. I didn't touch the phone. I didn't need to. She walked in minutes later, carrying a canvas grocery bag, as if this was just another ordinary Thursday. She was dressed like she'd been out running errands, but there was a tension in her posture. Something about her felt too poised. Hey, she said, like she was surprised to see me. You're back early. I wasn't. She just wasn't keeping track. Flight landed on time, I said. She crossed the room and kissed my cheek. The kiss was brief. Uncertain. Her eyes searched mine as if gauging what I'd seen, what I knew. And I realized then she'd rehearsed this moment. Not because she'd been expecting me now, but because she knew she'd eventually need to explain something. Guess what happened today, she said, breezing past me and unloading groceries like we hadn't been apart for 3 days. I ran into Brooke at that new cafe near the art district. Total accident. She snapped this picture and then we bumped into someone from her college years. Dylan, I think? He joined us for a few minutes, just long enough to say hi. Her voice was bright. Steady. Too steady. I didn't say anything. I just watched her. The way she moved through the kitchen like she was being observed, like she needed to stay in character. It wasn't just what she said, it was how quickly the story came, how layered the details were. She'd anticipated suspicion. She had answers loaded like bullets in a magazine. She turned toward me with a carton of oat milk in one hand and said, "Anyway, how was the trip?" "Same as always," I replied. "You know how it is." She smiled again, polite, distant, and nodded. "Glad you're back. I missed you." The words hit the air and hung there, strange and out of place. We hadn't said I missed you in months. Not seriously. She kept moving, and I let her. I watched, quietly, cataloging everything, the subtle shifts in her voice, the way her phone buzzed again and she didn't flinch, the fact that she didn't ask if I'd eaten. Near the door stood my travel bag. That was what finally made my heart drop. I'd left it half-zipped in the bedroom closet before the trip. Now it stood upright, wheels aligned perfectly, placed just inside the doorway. Not because I'd left it there, but because someone had put it there. It wasn't packed. It wasn't being used. It was positioned. Prepared. I didn't touch it. That night, after a quiet dinner that neither of us finished, she brought up Emma's wedding. "You didn't forget about the wedding this Saturday, right?" she asked, her tone light. "No," I said. "You mentioned it last week." "Well, Emma really wants us both there. She's been so stressed lately, and seeing us would mean a lot. You'll come with me, right?" I looked up from my glass of water. Her tone was casual, but her eyes were too focused, too intense. "Of course," I said. She smiled, and for a second, it looked like relief. But it wasn't the kind of relief you feel when someone says yes. It was the kind you feel when a plan goes off without a hitch. What she didn't know was that Emma had called me 4 days ago. Her fiancé had backed out. Cold feet, emotional unavailability, the usual mess. Emma didn't want a pity party or to cancel the ceremony. She just needed someone to stand beside her so the wedding could still mean something. Something quiet, resilient. "I just need you to be there, Ethan," she had said. "Not as a guest. Just as someone who won't flinch." I had agreed. So whatever Kayla had scripted for Saturday, whatever performance she was planning to stage, she had no idea that I was already in a different story. One where she wouldn't be the only one holding secrets. I left the city 2 days after the wedding. There wasn't a fight. No yelling, no slammed doors. Just a slow departure, like the tide pulling back after a storm. I told Kayla I needed to clear my head. She didn't protest, just nodded, her mouth tight, her eyes glazed over. It was the kind of agreement that doesn't come from understanding, but from someone who's already moved on in their mind. The lake house had been in my family for years, passed down from my uncle who died without children. I hadn't visited since I was a teenager. It wasn't large, just 2 bedrooms, a narrow kitchen, a fireplace that hadn't been used in ages, but it was surrounded by silence, and that was exactly what I needed. The first night, I sat on the old front porch with a blanket over my shoulders and a cheap beer in my hand, listening to wind whistle through the trees. No city noise, no traffic, no voices, just creaking floorboards and the occasional snap of pine needles beneath deer hooves. In that stillness, memories came. They didn't arrive in any particular order. They weren't cinematic or dramatic. They came like fragments, shards of things I had ignored or rationalized away. And now, for the first time, I let myself collect them. There were concert tickets I found months ago. 2 of them, printed from an email account I didn't recognize. Kayla had said they were for her coworker's birthday, a surprise gift, but the dates were wrong. The venue was far from the office, and when she came home that night, her shoes were scuffed in a way that didn't match a casual work thing. Then there was the business trip she took last fall to Denver, supposedly. She told me she'd be attending a conference, sent me a flyer. I remember thinking it was strange that the flyer didn't have a website. Later, out of curiosity, I searched the conference name online. Nothing, not even a whisper of it ever existing. I told myself I'd misunderstood. I convinced myself I'd spelled it wrong. But I hadn't. I remembered wine glasses in the sink one evening when I got home early from work. 2 of them. One with a lipstick stain that wasn't Kayla's shade. I asked who had visited. She smiled and said her cousin dropped by unexpectedly. I believed her. I always did. I remembered the change in perfume. She used to wear something light and floral, something that clung to sweaters and made the whole apartment smell like spring. Then it changed, sharper, muskier. I didn't mention it. People changed their preferences. But what bothered me wasn't the scent. It was that she started spraying it right before she left the house and never when she got back. I remembered the shift in how she handled her phone. At first, she was casual, leaving it face up, forgetting it on the nightstand. Then suddenly, it was always face down. Always locked. Notifications hidden. She claimed it was a work thing, a new privacy policy. But the way she'd tilt the screen away when I was near told me otherwise. Individually, none of these things had screamed betrayal. They were just strange, misaligned. But alone at the lake, with no Wi-Fi and nothing but time, they fell into place like puzzle pieces I hadn't known were connected. It wasn't the photo in the cafe that had hurt the most. It was the realization that I had been living next to a stranger, 1 inch at a time, for over a year. That she had been slipping away not in one dramatic exit, but in subtle movements. And I had let her. I had watched her fade and told myself it was just stress, or a phase, or something we talk about when things were calmer. But things had never gotten calmer, just quieter. One afternoon, I sat by the lake with a notebook in my lap. I tried to make a list, dates, moments, inconsistencies. I thought maybe I could build a timeline, see the arc of her drift. But the list turned into something else. Not a log, but a confession. Not hers, mine. I wrote things like, May said she was at yoga, saw a restaurant charge instead, didn't ask. July new earrings, said they were a gift from a client. Never saw the box. September talked in her sleep, whispered a name, Dylan. I asked in the morning. She said I must have dreamed it. I believed her. Each line was a moment I had chosen to ignore. Because I didn't want to be the guy who snooped. Because I believed trust meant giving someone the benefit of the doubt even when the doubt kept piling up. Because I was afraid of what it would mean if I was right. I sat with those pages in my lap until the sun went down and the notebook was damp with lake air. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just felt tired. And something else, shame. Not because she'd lied. But because I'd let myself be lied to so easily. Because I had wanted so badly to protect what we had that I'd stopped looking at what it was turning into. That night, I didn't sleep much. The floor creaked with every shift and the wind sounded like someone walking outside. But I didn't get up. I lay still in the bed that smelled like dust and cedar, staring at the ceiling and replaying her voice, her stories, her sudden affection that always seemed to appear right after she came home late. By morning, I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront her yet. I wasn't going to ask any more questions I already knew the answers to. I was going to find something solid. Something real. Because suspicion is a shadow, but proof is daylight. And I needed daylight now more than ever. It happened late one evening while the lake outside had gone glass smooth and the stars blinked down like indifferent witnesses. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I'd opened our old cloud folder, one of those shared drives we created years ago when we first moved in together. It was meant for tax stuff, vacation photos, and recipes we never used. It had been neglected for months, maybe longer. But that night, something told me to look. The folder layout hadn't changed. It still had those neatly named subfolders: 2019 Europe trip, joint expenses, wedding planning, tentative. I clicked through with no real plan, half curious, half hoping the distraction would be enough to lull me toward sleep. That's when I saw it, an untitled draft document buried under the Notes to Print folder. It had been modified a few weeks ago. I opened it. And there she was. It wasn't a document. It was a pasted email. An unsent draft addressed to someone named Brooke, a friend of Kayla's I vaguely remembered meeting once, back when we were still going to group dinners and double dates. Brooke had moved across the country a while back, but they still kept in touch. The email started mid-thought, like it was a second or third draft. But what stunned me was the tone, raw, unfiltered, almost confessional. There were no greetings, no flourishes. Just words tumbling out in full awareness that they were never meant for me. She wrote, "I don't know how to describe it exactly. Dylan makes me feel like I'm seen again. Not just looked at, but actually noticed. It's not about S**X or attention, it's the way he remembers little things I mention. The way he knows when I'm faking a smile. With Ethan, everything feels safe. Predictable. But with Dylan, I feel alive. I feel electric. And maybe that's selfish. Maybe I'm wrong for wanting something that disrupts everything I've built. But I'm so tired of feeling invisible." She went on. "It's not like Ethan did something wrong. That's what makes this harder. He's steady. He's kind. But I feel like I'm slowly fading next to him. Like I'm becoming a version of myself I don't even recognize. With Dylan, there's chaos. There's risk. But there's also something wild that reminds me of who I used to be. I didn't move for a long time. The room felt colder than before. The screen glowed against the shadowed walls and the lake outside was suddenly too quiet. I stared at the words, reread them once, then again. But not because I didn't understand. Because I did. She hadn't written about me. Not really. She'd written about herself. About her hunger for volatility. About the way she craved the rush of being needed by someone who didn't already know the whole map of her emotions. It wasn't an affair born from sadness. It wasn't about emotional neglect or growing apart quietly. This wasn't two people who stopped communicating. It wasn't even about love lost. It was a choice. A conscious trade. She'd chosen excitement over consistency. Chaos over calm. Fire over foundation. And what shattered me wasn't the betrayal itself, it was the clarity of it. The deliberate, intentional way she justified it. Like she was narrating her own arc toward a different life and I was just a subplot she didn't know how to write out yet. She hadn't said his name out loud to me. But here he was. Dylan. Inserted like punctuation between thoughts she'd never speak in my presence. She hadn't meant for me to see it. That much was obvious. It wasn't filed neatly. It was hidden in plain sight, like a guilt she didn't know how to delete. Or maybe she didn't want to. Maybe leaving it there was its own kind of confession. I closed the laptop slowly. I didn't slam it. I didn't curse. I didn't cry. I sat back in the chair, heart pounding in that strange way it does when something painful finally clicks into place. That sharp thud that tells you you're not angry yet, but you will be. That you're past denial, standing at the edge of something irreversible. I had been right all along. And still, that truth didn't comfort me. What do you do with clarity when all it gives you is a sharper picture of the wreckage? I stood up, paced the length of the cabin once, twice. I touched the edge of the kitchen counter, then let my hands fall limp. My body felt detached, like it hadn't caught up to my mind. I had thought finding proof would be some kind of justice. But it wasn't. It just hurt differently. That night I left the light on. Couldn't sleep. My brain kept looping the phrasing, with Ethan, everything feels safe. As if safety were a flaw. As if building a life on something stable was a weakness to escape. She didn't say I was cruel, or distant, or broken. Just consistent, dependable. And that was the problem. I wanted to scream, not because I was furious, but because I wanted to shake her by the shoulders and say, "Don't you know how rare that is?" But maybe she did know, and maybe she didn't care. By morning, the shock had hardened into something else. Resolve. I wasn't going to confront her about the email. There was no point. She'd either deny it or twist it into some therapeutic revelation about identity and growth. She'd probably say I wasn't supposed to read it, that it was private. But I had already stopped playing by her rules. Instead, I printed it. One copy, folded it cleanly, slipped it into a manila envelope, and placed it in my bag. Not to use as a *p*n, but as a reminder that I wasn't imagining things, that I hadn't invented the ache, that even if she never admitted it, the words existed. By the time I left the lake house, the trees had started to change. The maples were turning amber. The birch trees paled to yellow. It felt poetic, some dumb metaphor about decay and seasons and loss. But I didn't need a metaphor. I just needed to get out of there before I started making excuses for her again. As I drove away, the wind picked up. Leaves scattered across the road like they were chasing the car. I didn't look back. I didn't tell her I was back. I returned to the city on a Sunday, the streets quiet under a thin, overcast sky. I stopped at a gas station just off the highway and sat in the parked car for almost an hour, engine off, watching cars pass like I didn't quite belong in the rhythm of them anymore. There was no dramatic return. I didn't kick open any doors or call her from the front step. I just slid my key into the lock, stepped into the apartment like I still lived there, which I did technically, and stood still for a long time listening. The place was clean. Cleaner than when I left. Not immaculate, but curated. The kind of tidy that comes from someone trying to control the narrative. Nothing broken, nothing messy, but also nothing familiar. Her scent was still in the fabric of the cushions. That same musky perfume she'd switched to. It was faint, but I knew it too well now. I set my bag down by the hall closet, removed my shoes, and walked the apartment like it was a crime scene I was trying not to contaminate. I didn't announce my arrival. She wasn't home. When she came in that night, it took her a moment to realize I was sitting on the couch. I'd left the lights off, just a single lamp glowing in the corner. She froze in the doorway. "Ethan?" she said, startled. "You're back." I nodded. Didn't feel like texting. She stepped inside slowly, keys still in hand. "I didn't know when you were. I didn't tell anyone," I said, cutting her off without aggression. Just a matter of fact. She looked around like she didn't recognize her own apartment, as if my presence had altered the shape of it. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine." It was true in the simplest sense. I wasn't on fire. I wasn't broken. I wasn't weeping on the floor. I was just done pretending we were still something we weren't. She hovered by the door a few seconds longer, then walked to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water she barely sipped, and sat across from me. "We should talk," she said. I stared at her for a while. "About what?" "I know something's shifted," she said carefully, like she was choosing each word with tweezers. "I feel like we're both drifting." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because of how gently she packaged the word for what she'd done. Drifting, as if it were a passive current and not a deliberate choice. As if she hadn't already planted roots somewhere else. But I didn't call her out. Not yet. Not then. I just said, "Yeah, I noticed." That night, I didn't sleep in the bedroom. I told her I needed space. She didn't argue. She just nodded like she expected it. The silence between us grew legs. It wandered the apartment, sat beside us at breakfast, curled up between our words. She started tiptoeing, asking neutral questions. Did you eat? Do you need anything? Like I was a guest she didn't know how to host anymore. Then the signals began. Started small. She liked an old photo of us on Facebook, one from 4 years ago when we went hiking in Arizona. A week later, she shared a playlist we made together on her Instagram story. She didn't tag me, just posted it with a vague caption, "Throwback to better energy." I ignored them. Then came the emails. Not dramatic ones, just little notes. Subject lines like, "Hi" or "Can we talk soon?" They always started with apologies, some vague, some pointed. The first said she'd been thinking. The second said she'd been hurting. By the third, she mentioned Dylan. Not by name. Just him. She said it was over. She said she realized she'd made a mistake. That she hadn't known what she was risking until the quiet settled in. That I'd been the one who truly saw her all along. I didn't respond. There's a strange kind of power in silence. Not the petty kind. Not the ghosting kind. But the kind that says, I've heard enough. I don't need another version of this story. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't manipulation. It was clarity. She needed me to respond. Not because she missed me, but because her guilt was deafening. And I wouldn't be the one to make it easier for her to sleep at night. That week, a letter arrived. Handwritten. Folded neatly. Her penmanship had always been sharp, clean lines, no loops. Inside was a 5-page monologue. She wrote about missing my laugh. About cooking pasta alone and realizing how quiet the apartment felt without our usual back and forth. She said she'd started seeing a therapist. That she finally understood the difference between feeling wanted and being loved. The last page was different. She wrote, I thought choosing Dylan was choosing something new, but it was just running from the part of me that felt too ordinary to be loved. She included a Polaroid. Us in the kitchen 2 winters ago. Snow outside the window, my hoodie on her shoulders. I didn't remember someone taking it, but I remembered the moment. It was real. Brief but real. I burned the letter in the sink. Not out of anger, but because I didn't want it taking up space. I watched it curl and fold and vanish, turning to ash like something that had always been hollow. The flame flickered high at first, then settled into a steady dance as it consumed her words. I didn't feel powerful. I felt relieved. One night I heard from Emma. She texted just to check in. You okay? She asked. I told her the truth. I was not good, not healed, but okay. You handled the wedding like a pro, she said. You saved my day, and probably your own too. I smiled at the screen for a long time before I typed anything back. Just glad to be somewhere I was actually needed. After that, I started noticing how different silence could feel. Not heavy, not oppressive, just still, freeing. I stopped checking her social media. I stopped wondering if she'd reach out again. I knew she would. She wasn't reaching out for me. She was reaching out to escape herself. Her messages weren't invitations. They were lifeboats, and I wasn't drowning anymore. Time didn't heal anything. That's a myth. Time didn't offer wisdom or clarity. It didn't wrap me in some soft blanket of closure or make the sharp edges of her betrayal any smoother. Time just passed. What changed wasn't the pain, but the shape of the silence it left behind. I kept to myself after I left the apartment. I didn't make some dramatic exit or slam any metaphorical doors. I just disappeared from her world. Quietly, intentionally. I canceled the lease before she could stall it. Left a note that read, This space holds nothing for me anymore. You can keep it. I didn't pack everything. I left some furniture, some books, a few things that were too tied to memories to want to carry with me. She didn't text. Not for a week. Not until the silence stopped being convenient. Then it started again, her attempts. Not calls this time. She must have figured I wouldn't pick up. Instead, she used unfamiliar numbers, throwaway accounts, fake names on platforms she never used before. One message said, I'm not okay. Another said, Do you think I'm a monster? One was just, Can we just talk? But I wasn't interested in talking. Not because I hated her. Because there was nothing left to say. Her words didn't sting anymore. They just echoed into rooms I no longer lived in. A few months passed like that, quietly. I settled into a rhythm. I rented a room above a bookstore on the other side of the city, where no one knew me. The guy who owned the shop lived below. Old man. Spoke only in half-sentences and classical music references. It was perfect. Every morning, I'd walk 2 blocks to a cafe where the barista never asked my name and always remembered my order. I started journaling, not for healing, but because I needed somewhere to put the thoughts that still rattled loose in my head. I didn't write about her. Not directly. But pieces of her still showed up in metaphors and margins. Then one day, it happened. I was sitting at the cafe, headphones in but no music playing, just an excuse not to talk. 2 people sat behind me, both young, probably mid-20s. Loud in the way only people unscarred by the world could be. "Did you hear about that wedding last fall?" one of them said. "The one at the art gallery?" I froze, not because I recognized the event, but because of what came next. This woman apparently freaked out during the vows. Screamed at the guy like actually yelled across the room. Knocked over a table. Threw a drink. Total meltdown. Why? The other asked. No clue. But it was some friend of the bride. She stormed out before the cake was even cut. My stomach dropped. I didn't even have to hear the name. I already knew. Kayla. The wedding Emma had tried so hard to make meaningful, Kayla had used it as her stage. I could picture it clearly, her standing among strangers, watching me support someone else, realizing she no longer held any power in my orbit. That I was no longer orbiting her. That must have been the moment it hit her. The finality. The absence of control. I didn't turn around. I didn't interrupt. I let the conversation pass like weather. Later that evening, a message came in. No name. No ID. Just a number I didn't recognize and a single line. I wish I had done everything differently. I stared at it for a long time. Not because it meant anything, but because the cadence, the structure, the emotional rhythm was unmistakable. It was her. It always was. I didn't respond. I didn't delete it either. I just let it sit there. Like a voicemail on a machine I no longer checked. That's when I realized something. She was no longer a storm in my life. She was a hum in the background. A static noise I'd grown used to tuning out. Her decline wasn't dramatic or poetic, it was a slow erosion of presence. She went from being the gravity I'd once orbited to just another signal I could silence. But not everyone could. Through a mutual friend, I heard she'd been showing up places she didn't belong, running into people we both knew, spinning versions of the story where I had abandoned her too early, where she hadn't meant to fall for someone else, where the pain she felt now somehow proved the love she had before. I didn't correct the narrative. I didn't feel the need to defend myself. People will believe what makes them comfortable. And I was done being uncomfortable just to make other people feel better. I'd see old friends occasionally, people from the life before, and I could tell who had hurt her side by the way they hesitated. One mutual friend asked gently, "Do you ever think about going back? If she really regrets it?" I just smiled. Not bitterly. Not sarcastically. Just peacefully. "No," I said. "Some things don't deserve a second chance." I didn't hate her. But I didn't love her either. That place inside me where her name used to live had gone quiet. That was my closure. She kept trying. A voicemail from a blocked number played once before I hung up. It was her voice, shaky, asking if I remembered the time we danced in the kitchen to a song neither of us knew. I did remember. But it didn't mean what she wanted it to anymore. She was grasping now. Not for me. For who she used to be when she was with me. And I couldn't save her from that. I wasn't supposed to. We don't owe healing to the people who broke us. One day I received an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a photograph, one we took at the botanical garden 2 years ago. She had scribbled something on the back. I didn't know how good it was until it was gone. I looked at the photo. I looked at the version of myself in it, smiling, unaware, hopeful. Then I dropped it in the trash. Not out of spite, but because the version of me she missed didn't exist anymore. She had destroyed him. And I was someone else now. Someone quieter. Wiser. Free. It was just after 5 in the morning when I heard the knock. Soft, almost hesitant. Like whoever was on the other side wasn't entirely sure they wanted to be there. I was already awake, bad dreams, maybe, or just a restless night. The kind that's more waiting than sleeping. I sat up slowly, unsure if I'd imagined it. Then came another knock, firmer this time. I didn't open the door. I didn't need to. Through the frosted glass, I could make out a figure, shoulders slumped, arms wrapped around herself like the cold had settled inside her. Her hair was pulled back in that loose way she wore it when she didn't care how she looked. In her hand was something small and white, a note. She stood there for almost a minute. No pounding. No crying. Just waiting. Then, as quietly as she had arrived, she leaned down, placed the note on the doormat, and walked away. No look back. No final plea. Just retreat. I watched from behind the curtain, heart still but not hardened. There was no rush to pick up what she'd left. No need for confrontation. I waited until the sun came up fully, until the world had warmed a little, before I stepped outside. The note was folded into thirds. Inside, in her unmistakable handwriting, were just 3 words. You were right. That was it. Not I'm sorry. Not I miss you. Just that small admission. Honest. Unvarnished. And far too late. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I slid the note into the drawer with the others. I never read past the first line. I closed it gently. And just like that, it was over. Not with drama. Not with closure wrapped in a bow. But with silence and a finality I hadn't realized I'd been waiting for. 9 months passed. Not quickly. Not painfully either. Just naturally. Time didn't heal me. But it gave me space. And space did what apologies never could. Kayla never reached out again. Maybe she got tired of trying. Maybe she finally understood that the damage wasn't just about betrayal, it was about a version of love that could never be rebuilt. Either way, her silence was the closest thing to respect she'd given me in years. I moved to a new city. Not far, just enough that no one knew my name or my history. I found a quiet neighborhood filled with bookstores, parks, and cafes where people read more than they talked. It suited me. My apartment was modest, 2nd floor, corner unit, big windows. I bought mismatched furniture and a record player from a thrift store. I grew herbs in little clay pots on the sill. It wasn't the life I had imagined for myself, but it was real. And it was mine. One afternoon I was sitting on a park bench when a woman asked if she could share the seat. She had a cup of tea in her hand and a kindness in her voice. Her name was Claire. We didn't talk about exes or wounds. We talked about music. About how bread always tastes better when someone else makes it. About the weird comfort of rainy days. It was simple. Honest. Uncomplicated. And in that simplicity I didn't feel like a man broken or waiting to be fixed. I just felt human. For the first time I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I wasn't chasing answers. I wasn't measuring someone's words for hidden meanings. I was just there. Present. Whole. What Kayla had taken from me had been replaced, not with someone else, but with room to grow. I didn't need to be needed. I didn't need to be right. I just needed peace. And now I had it.